I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're delving into a hidden and devastating form of child abuse with Dr. Jim Gordon, author of a powerful book. It is called Emotional Incest, A Childhood Stolen. This groundbreaking book sheds light on covert emotional abuse, revealing how it damages lives and relationships in ways most people never realize. Join us as we explore how to identify and heal from emotional incest and reclaim your life. We're delighted to have this wonderfully talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Prime 7 Media for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his powerful book. The links are below this interview. Dr. Gordon, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
No problem. I'm here when you say solving the problems. That's a hard one. I haven't solved mine yet, but go ahead.
Well, it most emotional problems, most problems of recovering from abuse are difficult to solve, but I do think you can help put people on the right path to
Right.
healing, no doubt. Let's first define it. What is emotional incest?
That's a difficult and good question. It's considered to be basically it's what we call a covert incest. It's an emotional abuse in which a relationship between a parent and a child is inappropriately sexualized without actual sexual contact. And what I mean here is um, it doesn't really, next question you had on your report originally was how does one realize it's happening? But the truth is you don't really know it's happening when it's happening. Both sides think they're doing the right thing. As a kid growing up, my friends were, it affected me. That's why I wrote it. When I was growing up, my friends were like, "Wow, you're so lucky because your mom spends all the time with you. I wish your mom was my mom." And then later on, I realized, oops, probably wasn't the best thing. It was non-sexual. There was no, the sexual, it's inappropriately, as I said in the phrase there, it's inappropriately sexualized without actual sexual contact. It's when you're like, I love you, I love you, I love you too, and whatever. And you're really transferring things that should have been between mom and dad, or mom and boyfriend, or stepmom and stepdad, whatever. But you take the role and you're filling in the spots. Yeah, I'll tell you about one of those
So
later. But go
we
ahead.
basically find this in families where either the mother and father don't get along, or the mother and father are divorced or separated or whatever it might be. The child kind of fulfills the role of partner in the woman or the man's life, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's the one I was thinking of that I think I have in the book. I can't remember, but my one of my students when I was teaching special ed and I was doing seventh and eighth grade for a couple of years, and the young man came to me one day and he wasn't in my class. I mean, I special ed, I was the had behavior problem kids. And so, but we were in a smaller classroom, and some of the regular students liked to drop by because I'd had board games and I had different things that, would help my students want to work. Okay. And so this young man, I can't remember his name, let's call him JJ for now to be safe. And he came by one day and he's like, dude, he'd been hanging out and he'd been coming over during the break time and doing things. And he said, yeah, he said, here we go again. He said, I just got a message from my father that I needed. And he said, my father would always send messages like, quote unquote, I need to work with my secretary this evening, so I'm not going to be there. Take care of your mom, make sure dinner goes well, and your little brother's taken care of. Boom. Now that means JJ had to go home and be the
Man of
father,
the house, right?
man of the house.
Yeah.
Thank and take care of things and do whatever. And sorry, Logan, but jumping aside too there, but I teach at Mount St. Mary's University, have a large Hispanic population, and I found in a lot of Hispanic families, sometimes some of my Italian friends in that too, and it's not, as I say, it's not designated as it. But in the Hispanic, like my friend always says, she said, yeah, when I was growing up, she said, I had four brothers and sisters, and I was the oldest. And my friend Christy had the same thing happen in her Italian family, where mom would, say, "Hey, go ahead and make dinner tonight. I'm not going to be home. I'm going to be working." Christy's shape was mom. The other times it was usually mom also working. And you can take care of things, get the things done, you got to make sure your little brother has his clothes ready for school tomorrow, and you got to this, you got to that. And all of a sudden, yeah, you're the mom of the family, you're the mother taking the place of the mother. And sometimes it's okay, but when it becomes routine, as I say, my friend Christy said it happened all the time. So,
Yeah. So it depends on the level of it. Every now and then you have to be the man of the house. Dad's on a business trip or something like that, or the woman of the house in a reversed role situation. But when it's constant, when the parent is basically treating you as a surrogate spouse, like you said, absent sex, absent, any physicality to it, it's still, as you say, emotional incest.
and you're connected whether you want to, I mean, they say in some of our situations, they say I was one of those that I'm brightening up a little bit here. Um, I was in that situation where I didn't mind it. I've said to you before, I think one of the last times we talked, I mentioned that I was 6 years old when 5.5 years old, 4.5 years old when I started first grade, and I skipped kindergarten. And by the time I was six, was where the six comes from. I was doing a lot of things with my mom. We lived across the bay from New York City. She'd keep me home from school. My father was a workaholic. Um, I think busyism, I've talked to you about before. I think a lot of people who want to avoid things do busyism, where, sorry, I'm working all day. I've got work hours afterwards, or when I'm working home. Now that we're on Zoom, we can blame a lot of times too. But in fact, a friend of mine yesterday, he works for the entertainment industry, and I ran into him at Starbucks in the Valley. And I said, dude, why aren't you, well, I don't really work in an office anymore, but he said, I work at Starbucks, but he said, more than I do. He wasn't working, he was doing his movie business work there. He's an
Right.
agent and whatever. And he said, if I'm over by the regular office, or even if I'm home, people can bother me and say, what are you doing? He said, but here, I can kind of lose myself here and stay occupied. And he said, gives me an excuse. And the busyism thing, as I say, parents do that. And sometimes my father did that. He
Yeah.
wasn't real happy to be married. He wasn't happy to do whatever. As I say, we talked about it before in other interviews, but he was a lot older than my mother, and he took the place of my mother's father, who had disappeared when she was born. And so, I was taking the place of, he was her father, so she could bitch and complain, and they argued all the time. I have a friend in France that his father also left when he was born. My friend's in his 50s. And when I'm having dinner with them, I'll be in France in 2 weeks. And I go there 3 times a year, and we'll be having dinner. And my friend and his mom will be bickering like a married couple, and his mom will look at me when he's talking. I don't speak French purposely, so I don't have to get involved, but at the same time, she'll be jabbering in French to him, and she'll look at me and like, and then 2 minutes later, then he looks at me like, she's crazy. I'm like,
It's funny.
I don't need to hear this crap.
Yeah,
That's why I don't
exactly.
want to know the language. But
Exactly.
yeah, you get hooked in.
Yeah.
And and that's where it's a way of avoiding. And that's what was my father was. He worked regular hours and he opened a store after hours. And we were back in New Jersey in the days when we had blue laws on weekends, Sundays, and they weren't supposed to be open, but he opened it. It's a hobby shop.
Yeah.
And he'd be there till 7 o'clock at night and then go to the bar across the street, at the tavern, and stay there till midnight, then come home, go to bed, get up the next morning, go to work at the
Yeah.
military base, come back and do whatever. So we avoid, and I wasn't complaining because my mother was like, "Why don't you stay home today? Let's go into New York City. I'll take you to Macy's. We'll go shopping." I ate at Sardi's and other places more than I ever should have, even though we weren't rich, but we went to nice places. And I wasn't complaining. I didn't have to go to school. As I say, that's why I mentioned the younger age at school.
Yeah.
I wasn't really in it with the kids. I say it was when I went to high school at 12. We were living near the Arizona and and Mexico border. So my friends would be going to Mexico during lunch and getting drunk and finding girlfriends and that. And I was like, why would we be doing this? Yeah, so I
Yeah.
never really realized it was happening, but I was enjoying the time off from school.
Yeah, I think most children wouldn't realize they're in that situation. And even as they mature into adults, they might not realize they were in that situation. They might say, I had a close relationship with my mother, but they might not realize that this is at the heart of some of the interpersonal relationships they have as an adult. Tell us a little bit about how it manifests itself in an adult when a child has been the victim of this type of emotional incest.
Yeah, as you know, I mean, one of the things too, and you alluded to it earlier, different reasons in families. I say one of the things it can often go hand in hand with alcoholic mothers or alcoholic fathers, meaning that, you alluded to the fact that they weren't available. My mother was not, she was what I called a convenience alcoholic. My father had to have drinking every day, and that was his way of, getting through the night. But my mother, it was only, she might be sober for 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, and then boom, boom, wham. Um, we had something called Milltown back in New Jersey in the 50s. It was a sedative medication. It's supposed to be calming. Milton is actually the name of it. And my mother used that from time to time to chill. And when she did, she'd get really wasted and she was in no shape to drive, no shape to do anything. But that's when I need you home to take care of things today. I was an only child, okay? But I need you around today. I need you to go to the doctor with me. Oh my God, you don't know how many times I went to doctors. I, one of my favorite stories is, my mother and father were married. Stayed married until my father died at almost 90 years of age, and he died. But I was the husband there too, as they say, and I remember I was only 12 years old. I was in the eighth grade and I got a phone call. We had landlines in those days, boom. And hi, this is Dr. Silverman from Red Bank. Is this Jimmy? I'm like, yes. He said, I want you to know that I do not ever want to see your mother anymore. I'm her psychiatrist. She comes in once a week. She was so drunk today, she threw up in the fish tank. And
God.
that's disgusting.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it before, but medical offices and that they'd have a fish tank to make
Yeah.
it cool and collected. And I'm getting the call. I said, did you call my father? He said, I don't even try talking to your father. He never talks back. He doesn't call back. So I'm talking to you. And I thought, I'm 12 years old, you know, and that was my responsibility. Do you know how many times um, I I knew she'd call the paramedics and say that, she needed to go to the hospital, and they'd arrive, and I'd say, "Hey, she doesn't." She'd
Mm.
also call the fire department because of gas leaks in the house. No, they weren't, and I had to deal with all that. Now, that was emotional incest, and the fact that I was the husband, I was the one.
Yeah.
Did they call my father? No.
Yeah.
And when you said that, I don't know if it'll work on your screen here, but I'd like to try it. Um, Say I do Zoom all day, but oh, can I share? When you asked the question before about it, how does somebody process it? How do you deal with it as an adult? Trust me, I was living my life. I was enjoying the liberty of freedom of not going to school and all that. And it wasn't until I was 40 and my father died that I realized what the fuck, excuse me, what the hecky poo
Yeah.
is going on here because they told me I had a 3-day bereavement time at the clinic. Okay. And I said, I don't need to bereave. I haven't talked to him in 5 years because in my case, I divorced my parents. Uh, and we talked about that before in order to get away from it. And at that point, I was so angry. Why are you telling me I should take the time off from my father? And I'm not that I didn't care about him, but he didn't talk to me for the last 5 years because my he wouldn't let me talk to him without my mother being there. Talk about emotional incest. I'd call him and say, "Hey, can I come out and see you?" We were only a half hour away. And he said, your mother's going to be there. And I said, I don't want to talk to her because I divorced her. We've talked about it, but it reminds you, but when I was 34 years old, uh, and the actual anger came out later. The 34-year-old, when I got home and she said, she was at my house and said, good news, I'm moving in with you and we're going to live happily ever after like we did before. And I was like, pardon me? She said, oh, yeah. She said, this will be great. She said, you and I can do everything like we used to. And I was thinking, no. But then that's when I divorced her. And I wanted to talk to my father, but he kept saying, I can't talk to you without your mother being there. Uh, I said it before too, that even the minister was calling me and saying, hey, you really need to talk to your mom. And I'm like, do I need to talk to my mother for your benefit so that she's not going to bother you anymore? And
Mm.
he said, well, yeah, partly.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, then we have a problem here. And so it was then that, from the thing over on the book on the side here that I disconnected right now, but that's when I realized I was really angry at the world. I used to have such a temper, you know, I I would put my fist through doors, hollow core doors when I got
Mm.
mad at things. I would slam stuff. Um, they say I would flip people off. I got mad at a Sears store one day when I went in to get shock absorbers and I'm looking through things. The guy said, you can't open the boxes up. I said, I'm not opening up the boxes that were already open. I said, ones that had open end. I'm being careful. And the guy's like, you can't do that. You're opening it. And so I took the box of, car
Yeah.
shock absorbers and threw them at him. I'm like, okay, so I started to realize I was angry. Um,
Did
Divorcing a
divorcing your parents help? Did doing the divorce help?
That's funny because that was my next
It
thing.
was,
Forcing a parent.
yeah.
Yes, yes. I had a boundary.
Yeah.
You, me, the rest of the world, we have boundaries. Okay.
Yep.
We don't always know it. In my domestic violence program that I deal with, I do, special court-ordered classes primarily for celebrity and entertainment people or Beverly Hills clients who are international business people, not people that are in and out of jail all the time, but um, high end. And they'll talk about what happened. They say one of my favorites is when, a guy will say, this is the 15th time this has happened. I told her to this and this, and finally I had to hit her. Because most of mine are not physical abuse, most of it is emotional abuse, verbal abuse, financial abuse, and sexual abuse. Very little hitting. Other categories, other places, they have a lot of people that hit each other.
Right.
Mine, no, it's usually, it doesn't get to that point. But I'm like, dude, men say that you're logical, women are emotional. When are you going to be logical enough to realize that if you've told her 12 times something and it hasn't worked? Or the one guy was, I told her 100 times. I said, how many more times did you think you'd have to tell her? So we have boundaries.
Mm.
We have boundaries on everything. Um, Usually, this is one of the problems with people working at home now. We don't have the same boundaries. It used to be we go to work from 8 to 5, 9 to 4, whatever, and you knew you're out of there theoretically. We do have a boundary nowadays with the Zoom thing, wherever my Zoom thing is here, when I when I turn the Zoom off, when I do the group, it's done.
Yeah.
When I did the groups in my office, I say I'm in my other office now, but when I did the groups in my actual physical office, um, it was sort of weird because I'd say, okay, group's over, domestic violence is over, time to go home. It's, 4:30 or 6:30, say. But a lot of the guys would say, can I talk to you for a second? Or I'd go downstairs to Starbucks. I'm in Beverly Hills on the second floor, and there's a Starbucks downstairs. I'd go down to Starbucks and I'd walk in. Oh, Doc, I had a question for you during group, but I didn't get to ask. Can I ask you now? And I'm thinking, okay. Whereas when I click the button and end the group, they can call me, but
Right.
I cannot answer.
Right. But when you face to face like that, it's hard to enforce that boundary. Like, I'm sorry, I'm at Starbucks now. You know, I don't really have time to discuss that. Save it for next week, right?
Right. And this is
Yeah.
where I talk about how much can you take. This is when divorcing a parent becomes an issue. My mother and I had spent hours and days, almost every Easter picture, when we go to Asbury Park, on Easter Sunday and I'd have a hat on and a big warm coat, and she'd have a big warm coat because it was cold in New Jersey. Or when we do different things here, and my mother was there, everybody's, oh, it's so nice of you. You and your mom, you have such a great relationship. I didn't realize we'd gone over the boundary. Here's the
Exactly.
boundary. Shh, we'd gone over. Now, if you're, and this is sorry to make it, over the over the over the boundary, but
Yeah.
when you're talking back and forth, it's one thing. When you're in bed together, that
Mhm.
would be stepping over a boundary, and you would probably know. Now, I've dealt with a lot of sexually abused people, and a lot of them didn't realize what was going on. They thought, oh, because, there was that one uh, minister in Atlanta, Georgia, who got in trouble for sexual abuse with boys because he'd take his young men, from Atlanta, Georgia. He said, these guys are, big guys and they're sports people and whatever. I mean, they're going to be. And he would do sexual things with them.
Mhm.
But it was minor. He said it was just minor sexual things, but I wanted them to know what it's like to be a real man and what to do, what the woman wanted, what was going on.
Right.
So there's boundaries. Okay, how far do you go? Sorry, I'm going to sneeze, I think. Okay. Um, And this is where the emotional one is harder to figure out because the
Right.
people, they
The
say,
line is blurry. There is no line really. It's just gradations, right?
my patient Dana, who committed suicide at 33, her older sister came and talked to me because she committed suicide after she finally was talking to me about and being open about her father abusing her. Her father was an airlines pilot out of Atlanta. Also, he was a church deacon in Atlanta in a born-again Christian church. And he had been in the military, whatever. And she came in, and in fact, her sort of boyfriend, well, sort of husband, they were living together for 15 years, and he had been in my domestic violence groups, and he said, I want to bring her in so that she can talk about some of these things and talk to you. He said, I grew a lot and I want her to grow up. So she's there and she tells me after about the fourth or fifth time, I'm careful as a shrink not to let them say too much the first time because sometimes they'll be too nervous. On the fourth or fifth time, she really got into how her father started abusing her when she was 9. And we know that happens. As I say, I knew that one actress friend of mine, Ann, that her father started fooling around with her when she was only 4. Okay, but that was his issue and hers. But this young lady, when she finally tells me all this stuff, she went home, felt totally devastated because her mother, when she talked to her mom be like, "Don't talk to me about your dad that way. Your dad's a wonderful man. He's, in the eyes of God, he's a deacon, beacon. He's a beacon too, but he's a deacon. He's all these wonderful, wonderful things." And she said, "Don't, be rude about your father." And she
Mhm.
slapped her daughter. Well, it turns out after she told me everything and shared it, which she'd already shared with her husband or boyfriend before, but now somebody else heard it. She went home, swallowed a bunch of pills, um, tried to kill herself, got rushed off to the hospital. In the emergency room, behind little curtains where they have the little sections,
Mhm.
she puked, threw everything up. The nurse stepped out with him and said, "Hey, I think," with her other half, and said, "I think she'll be okay now." I don't think we have to do anything. They opened the door and she's disappeared. She slipped out under the curtains, whatever they found her the next morning, with a trash bag strapped around her neck in the janitor closet. Her father called and said, I'm going to sue you
Yeah.
and sue the hospital, for killing our daughter. At that point, the older daughter came forth and said, Hey, I can't let this happen. It's my fault that my sister died. She said, when she said, my father was having sex with me. When my sister turned 9, he turned to her and started doing her. And she said, I just was so happy. I mean, actually, thank God that he wasn't bothering me anymore. She said, I ignored it. So there's a lot of things that we do that we ignore. And this goes back to my life, liberty, and the pursuit of anger. Sometimes, the boundaries get pressed and you don't know how far do you go. When the kid next to you in the restaurant starts to yell a little bit because they're not happy with their soup, a minute or two, if you're in a restaurant that's a
Yeah.
family restaurant, you're an idiot if you don't expect some of that to happen.
Right.
But when 40 minutes later,
Right. Right.
the kid is still yelling, and what I love particularly is when mom's busy looking on the phone, honey, shh.
Exactly.
And
You got to know where to draw the line. You got to know where the boundary is. The name of the book we've been talking about today is Emotional Incest, A Childhood Stolen. It is a groundbreaking book that sheds light on covert emotional abuse, revealing how it damages lives and relationships in ways most people never realize. Dr. Gordon, thanks again for another insightful conversation. I appreciate your time here today on Spotlight.
thank you. And I say people recognize things as they go. There's no simple answer. It's just the fact that you have to work on it. And that's why the Pursuit of Anger book got switched to the simpler title, because I'm going to be angry till I croak.
Well, I hope not. You don't seem like an angry guy, so I hope not.
Well, I
For
know
those
how to
who,
process it. Okay.
okay, good, good, good. I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.